The world out there still operates hastily and carelessly, but we know deep in our hearts that humanity's end is near. You can deny it for as long as you like, but without change, extinction is inevitable. Allow me to introduce myself. I am Angelia Camel, a professor with 15 years of research in climate change, biodiversity, and biochemistry, along with a master's degree in history and archaeology. My mission is to awaken humanity, to force them to look squarely at their responsibility to the environment. But that's not enough. I must act. I must create positive change. My father, who passed on to me this fierce love for the planet, once said, "An action, however small, is better than 1,000 empty words." I vow to use my last breath to preserve a future for humanity, a chance to exist. But this world is dominated by money, a cruel but undeniable truth. Without funding, all research, no matter how urgent, will quickly fade. My father experienced this bitterness nearly 30 years ago, right here in the Andes. He had nearly touched upon a new energy source, a perfect replacement for fossil fuels. But then, when the university president's seat changed, the interest in the climate vanished. His entire body of work sank into oblivion. For the past 10 years, I have fought relentlessly to resurrect that project. It seemed hopeless, but I never gave up. I worked side by side with my father, lobbying, searching for every grant, every opportunity, no matter how small, to make the dream a reality. And then, like a miracle, 2 weeks ago, my father returned with a check from the new president. Once again, the winds had changed, carrying political calculations with them. But we didn't care, because the number on that check exceeded all expectations, over $1 million. I was almost speechless, my mouth agape. I had to check the number a dozen times while my father tried to restrain himself from having a heart attack. Our excitement wasn't just scientific success, it was deeply personal. My mother passed away while trying to discover the strange properties of an unknown mineral hidden deep in the high mountains near the border of Colombia and Ecuador. A cave collapse took her life and that of her entire research team, putting an end to all future excavations. Now, finally, we had the chance to prove my mother's theories and help reduce humanity's carbon footprint. The feeling was both exhilarating and strangely sacred. There was so much to prepare. Heavy machinery needed to be bought, personnel needed to be assembled, and supplies needed to be secured. The list seemed endless. My father, with his vast experience, always tried to keep me calm. "Slowly, Angelia. Thorough preparation can take months, but as long as the money is in hand, everything is under control," he reassured me. I relied heavily on my father to contact experts. Although the excavation site was still fairly intact, I knew that returning to South America and setting up camp was no easy task. The area near the site is incredibly harsh. Temperatures range from dry heat to bone-chilling cold within just a few miles. Winding valleys, dense, unexplored forests, this place often became a battlefield for guerrilla forces. Just accessing the site was a feat. Ground transport was clearly impossible. The trails were only wide enough for wild animals, completely unsuitable for the huge volume of supplies we needed. Air transport, dropping supplies onto the mountain, was the only viable solution, and this was our first major expense. The facilities at the site were minimal and dilapidated. Designed to hold a maximum of 10 to 12 people, it was old, cramped, and lacked plumbing, ventilation, and modern amenities. The participants needed to be assured that this journey was worthwhile, which meant they had to receive hefty compensation. The monthly salaries quickly eroded our budget. We had to pay for cleaning the excavation area and renovating the facilities with clean water, electricity, and temperature control systems. When my father and I arrived, only 30% of the facility was ready. The rest was covered in tangled vines, threatening to swallow the building at any moment. But that couldn't discourage us. The people my father found were made of steel. They worked day and night to advance deep into the mountain. The harsh weather caused equipment to break down constantly, but they persisted, toiling with picks and shovels. Norman, the excavation team leader, often sang homeland songs to boost morale, anything to keep them awake. The erratic weather made us feel lost, immersed in an indescribable sense of unease. Finally, we reached the area where my mother had theorized, a place leading to a part of the earth untouched by human feet. I was shocked to see the site of the cave collapse, the place that likely claimed my mother's life, leaving a pile of rubble. My father signaled for Norman's team to pause, taking a minute of silence for my mother and those who had fallen. The air in the room felt thick, squeezing my heart. I heard distant screams echoing in my head, imagining my mother might have suffocated right where I was standing. The thought made me shudder. But we didn't come here to falter. The excavation officially began. The team worked through the night, using the excavator until it could no longer operate, moving huge heaps of earth and rock. Every meter deeper into the mountain felt like a century. But my father always reminded me, "We are here, Angelia, very close to the goal. We are about to make history." It took nearly 2 weeks to reach the next antechamber of the cave, a vast, magnificent space full of rock and lava, looking as if it were carved by ancient, talented craftsmen. Finally, we could proceed on our own feet. My father led the way, using the lamp mounted on his helmet to illuminate the deep darkness. The air was chilling, as if we were lost in a corner of the world that had never known sunlight. I felt like I was entering a forbidden place. "The air in here probably hasn't been breathed in 600 years or longer," my father whispered. Behind us, the excavation team proceeded silently, carrying lanterns. Dominic Legray, the expedition's professional photographer, stopped to capture every corner. "It's bizarre," he remarked as we turned each bend. There were no signs of life in the cave, only faint traces of desolation, as if something had eroded the ground itself. I was here, ready to begin discoveries that could change history, but what we were looking for seemed to have vanished. Only one of the smaller machines, a drill, could fit through the next tunnel. Norman and his deputy Manuel took turns pushing it deeper into the rock. Phosphorus chemicals filled the air, making us all quickly cover our mouths. Manuel began to cough violently, vomiting a dark red fluid, unable to cover his mouth in time. "Dr. Howlett, we need medical assistance immediately," my father said over the radio as we pulled Manuel out of the toxic smoke. I wanted to stop to check on Manuel, but my father was too focused on the excavation and what might lie ahead, so I couldn't leave him. Crawling through to the other side of the narrow passage, we were stunned to find ourselves standing on a frozen ice lake. "There's something in the ice," Norman shouted, shining his light down. My father moved closer, straining his eyes through the thick ice, trying to identify the strange object. "Looks like a body bag," Norman admitted, his voice full of anxiety. I couldn't help but shudder as I looked closer. How could this be here? "Maybe it's a member of Mom's expedition. Maybe they got farther than we thought," I suggested. "We won't know until we excavate the body," my father said firmly. He contacted the doctor via radio. "Howlett, turn the main conference room into a temporary morgue. We are bringing the specimen up immediately," he ordered. "This isn't right. Look at how this room was designed. It was sealed, as if we weren't allowed to be here," Norman said, trembling. "Don't be superstitious, it's just a corpse," my father snapped, and ordered the excavation to begin immediately, "or you'll lose a week's pay." Obviously, that threat was enough to get everyone working. For the next few hours, we diligently chipped away the ice surrounding the body. As we got closer, it was clear this was not a body from 30 years ago. No, it was much older, perhaps from the Incas or other indigenous tribes. A lost soul, forgotten by the grim flow of time. When the body was within reach, I could clearly observe its features. A chilling sense of foreboding washed over me. It was hard to recognize this as ever being human. because the body had no eyes, nose, or any features on its face. However, the overall shape showed it was a small, middle-aged woman curled up in a fetal position. The cold has mummified it. Perhaps the internal organs are still intact, my father remarked, pointing out that decomposition had stopped at some point after burial. Clearly, the way the body was placed in the ice shows this death was intentional. Someone deliberately put them here to ensure they could never leave. That night, after dinner, Dr. Howlett began his research on the specimen. I couldn't swallow a bite, my mind obsessed with the image of the corpse. Meanwhile, my father seemed very excited, insisting we be present to observe. They used rudimentary tools to draw a blood sample from the frozen mummy. With this sample, we can determine the time of death and perhaps learn more about our new friend, he explained. His sparkling eyes made me wonder what his real purpose was, but I didn't dare question it. Meanwhile, the excavation team below had paused their work, both curious and terrified of the mummy. Many of the team are superstitious. They think this is a curse descending upon us, especially since Manuel is now gravely ill, unable to leave his bed after inhaling that damn chemical. I scoffed at the absurdity, but this body truly made me uneasy. Dominic Legray, the expedition's professional photographer, stopped to capture every corner. "It's bizarre," he remarked as we turned each bend. There were no signs of life in the cave, only faint traces of desolation, as if something had eroded the ground itself. When drilling into the distorted left arm, the bone examination revealed the terrible truth. The doctor said it out loud. "They were still alive when they were put in the ice," he said, examining the sample under the microscope. "My God!" my father exclaimed. It was the first time I had heard anxiety in his voice. "Perhaps not," the doctor said, showing him. I also peered through the microscope, which showed worm-like creatures moving among the remnants of the bone marrow. As they writhed and began to spin, a chill ran down my spine. "This is a pathogen, a biological weapon," I said, "and that explains why they were buried so quickly. The ancient people wanted to stop the infection." "Can you identify what this is?" I asked Dr. Howlett. "It will take more time. I can take more samples from the intact organs. Although the cells have decomposed, it's very likely the virus still exists deep inside the body." "Do it immediately," I said, unable to hide my eagerness. He nodded and returned to the temporary morgue, grabbing his tools and beginning to melt the remaining ice layers. My father squeezed my hand. We were both silent, captivated by what was happening. We needed to know if we were in danger. The answer became clear in an instant. As the last membranes of ice melted, Dr. Howlett paused his work and increased the temperature in the room, eager to begin the real autopsy. Seeing the body in the new light, I felt my anxiety surge again, realizing what agony that strange disease had caused that poor soul. Then, from nowhere, the body suddenly jerked. Dr. Howlett screamed in fear and dropped his surgical tools. A sudden breath escaped from the corpse, enough to freeze him in fear. My father and I also stood there dumbstruck in horror, unable to believe our eyes. The body barely moved, but the signs were clear. Whatever we had found, it was still alive. Quarantine. Perhaps you think you know all about this word, but you are wrong. The word takes on a whole different meaning when you are trapped in a desolate, cold place, with nothing around but a corpse that is starting to revive. Less than 6 hours after we discovered the mummy might still have living tissue, the administrators locked down the entire area and ordered us to await further instructions, and above all, no one was allowed to leave. Easier said than done. The news of how the body reacted spread like wildfire through our group, and although the corpse now seemed to have returned to its inert state, none of us dared to venture near it, let alone stay in the same room. Panic began to spread among the workers and even the seasoned scientists. "We need to identify what we are facing," my father insisted that evening as we gathered in the dining hall. "It's a demon, an evil force from the other world," Norman shouted, and his workers agreed with hushed whispers. I realized it wouldn't be long before they rioted, demanding to leave this hell. Or, I proposed, ignoring their superstitions, perhaps the infectious microbes have mutated and taken control of the body, allowing a new life form to control the corpse. If we can prove this threat is just a natural phenomenon, perhaps the panic will subside. But humans rarely listen to reason in a crisis. For the time being, my father's assertion that we should stay on the opposite side of the building and focus on the excavation work seemed to calm their fears. At least they could bury themselves in their work, forgetting their fear in the icy caves below. After dinner, unable to sleep, the workers returned to the mountain, while Dominic called me outside to look closely at the photos he had taken of the mummy. I thought I had memorized enough details, but Dominic's photos depicted them with a chilling reality that made me shudder. The camera's sharp lens allowed him to zoom in on the deep wounds, and thanks to that, I discovered another dangerous detail: mold. Very likely the source of the infection, microbacteria were slowly growing out of thousands of tiny holes on the body. I've seen spores like this before, deep in the Amazon rainforest, I said. There is an extremely dangerous fungus that can control insects to spread. I'm almost certain this is something similar, my father said, after reviewing the photos. I sensed the doubt in his voice. Was he afraid this journey would end tragically, like Mom's? Not exactly the same. An ancient variant, a giant supervirus that has been accidentally awakened, he admitted, his eyes turning towards the sealed room. Occasionally, we could still hear the heavy, intermittent, bizarre breathing of the reviving mummy. I wondered if it was the fungus trying to push out more spores and fill its lungs. It was hard to ignore that haunting sound, but my father insisted we stay away. If only I had listened to him. The turning point came when I went to check on Manuel. Another worker, Jarvis, was by his side, using a cold cloth to reduce his fever, but it was clear Manuel was not well. His body was shaking violently, and his breathing was heavy, as if something had invaded and taken root deep in his lungs. I hurried to call Dr. Howlett. But Dr. Howlett was in no condition to help us. After waiting for over 30 minutes, I worriedly went to the medical bay and found him unconscious, covered in sweat, collapsed on the floor. Just one glance at his arm gave me the answer. The part of his arm scratched by the mummy was now swollen, purple, and frighteningly inflamed. Something was infecting him, causing extreme pain. I hurried to get water, trying to wake him up. How could it have spread so fast? Howlett slowly opened his eyes, and I could see the pain etched deep in his soul. He was terrified, but tried to hide it. "I'm just a little dizzy," he insisted, as I helped him up, careful not to hurt his swollen arm. "Why didn't you report this immediately?" I scolded. "We have to find a cure for you right now. And what are you going to do? Cut off my arm? It's useless. The virus has spread throughout my body, Angelia," he shouted, the fear he tried to hide now spilling out. "If we don't do anything, it will kill you." "I'd rather die than let the whole group get infected," he replied curtly. I shook my head, deciding not to waste time arguing. "You may think you're sacrificing yourself, but Manuel is already gravely ill. I think his lungs are already full of mutations from the initial spores. But I need your help to conduct a full examination," I said, as we left his small room. Howlett nodded, signaling me to lead him to Manuel. "Angelia, tie him down," he said, pointing to a pile of clothes. "Once I start, he will most likely resist violently." I tore up the clothes and stuffed a piece into Manuel's mouth. "The only way to get an accurate sample is to cut into his lungs," the doctor explained, his hands shaking as he prepared the surgical tools. I was about to tell him to wait, but he had already made the first incision. As predicted, Manuel screamed, the sound muffled by the gag. I tried to hold him still and asked Norman to do the same. We all had to use all our strength to hold Manuel down as the doctor continued to cut. But as he opened a cavity to access the lungs, a strange, foul-smelling chemical stream suddenly sprayed from Manuel's body, hitting Howlett directly. The doctor immediately choked and fell back, dropping his tools, clutching his throat as he collapsed. I stood far away, too scared to get close. Just a moment later, the doctor stopped breathing. In that instant, I forgot about Manuel. He suddenly sprang up, driving an elbow into my ribs. Acting like a cornered wild animal, he grabbed the scalpel and waved it in the air. "Don't touch me, you bastards!" he roared, backing out of the room. "Manuel, you're not well. We're just trying to help you," Norman tried to reason. "I'm leaving this hell and none of you can stop me," Manuel said, holding his wound. He staggered out of the room, and Norman instinctively started to follow. But I managed to stop him. "He can't get far. Think about where we are," I said, trying to calm Norman. I stepped over to Dr. Howlett's body, trying to check the damage the spores had caused. I saw the virus was already starting to rot his flesh, decomposing it at a horrifying rate. Even the characteristic smell of death was gone, as if he had never existed. But I still heard a heavy wheezing sound coming from his chest. The thought that he might still be suffocating made me shudder. "Contact my father, immediately. We need to move his body to the same room as the mummy," I ordered Norman. I told my father everything about Manuel. Needless to say, he was furious. "That bastard can't leave. What were you thinking, Angelia? What if this virus is airborne?" he growled. He quickly checked the limited security system we had and breathed a sigh of relief. "No exit doors have been activated. The kid is still here, probably hoping to recover before escaping," he said, trying to regain his composure. "I'm sorry. I didn't think of that," I admitted, feeling guilty. Father told Dominic and Norman to arrange Howlett's body next to the mummy, while he gave me other orders. "Find that kid and bring him back. If he's also dying from the same thing, we need to know why Manuel isn't affected in the same way. That might be the key to our survival," he explained. Then he handed me a handgun. "In case the kid gets aggressive, don't hesitate to defend yourself," my father said, his eyes serious. Remembering how Manuel had just attacked us, I wisely took the gun and started searching. In a small building like this, options were limited. I went to one of the old tunnel doors that led to the observatory and noticed bloody boot prints, confirming he had passed this way. I turned on my phone's flashlight to illuminate the dark, damp stairs, calling his name. The abandoned observatory was as cold as a tomb, one of the first places to collapse after the landslide years ago. As I carefully stepped over the rubble onto the mountainside, I thought again about how these rocks might have been what took my mother's life. A gentle summer rain began to fall. As I carefully followed the slope up, I saw Manuel moving carefully among the rocks, clutching the scalpel, trying to find a clear path. "You need to stop before you hurt yourself," I shouted. His wild eyes turned to look at me, and he screamed a curse in his native language as he started to run. His fight-or-flight instinct had taken over. I ran after him, heart pounding, thinking of my father's warning. The nearest village was over 40 miles away, but who knew if indigenous tribes were hiding in the dense forest below? Manuel could not be allowed to leave. In desperation, I jumped down to the next section of the stairs. The old metal steps creaked and shook violently. I continued to shout, but he couldn't hear me. Not just because of me, something else was drowning out my voice. A terrifying sound from above. We both froze, listening as it grew louder. At first, I thought it was an avalanche. Then I saw them. A squadron of dark, aggressive helicopters tearing through the gray clouds. They brought me no comfort, especially when I realized who was piloting them. The military. They were all armed to the teeth. I saw AK-47s, grenades, and knives as big as my arm. As the helicopters approached, one of the soldiers pulled out a sniper rifle, and my heart sank. A cold red laser beam cut through the gloomy air as they aimed at Manuel. I don't remember if I screamed. I know I wanted to. Amidst the roar of the engines and the falling rain, they pulled the trigger. The bullet tore through Manuel's face. Blood sprayed from his forehead. His body jerked back like a puppet and then collapsed onto the cold ground. Just seconds later, long ropes were dropped and soldiers began to slide down to where I was standing. I trembled, stunned by their cold, ruthless indifference to the man they had just murdered. Did they know he was infected, or did they just want to ensure that none of us could escape? My unspoken question was answered immediately. An officer with glittering medals stepped up, pointing his gun at Manuel's body again. "This facility is now under our control. Put your hands on your head and lie on the ground. Immediately, all of you." I was herded like cattle back to the main dining hall. Armed soldiers blocked every exit as they swept the entire facility. My father and Dominic were already there, both looking anxious. "The perimeter is secure, sir," one of the younger soldiers reported to their commander. I was still shaken from witnessing them calmly execute Manuel. "Who are you?" my father asked, stepping boldly toward the highest-ranking officer. "Professor Gamel, I understand you have questions, but you needn't be surprised. The university sent us as soon as they heard about the discovery you made. I am Colonel George Kelly, United States Army Special Forces." "Since when does the military assist universities?" I asked. "Since we deemed this site a potential threat to international security," Kelly replied. Then turned to my father, clearly seeing him as the one in charge. "Where is the mummy, Professor? I want to see it." I pulled my father's arm and whispered, "Why should we cooperate? Dad, you saw what they did to Manuel. They could kill us all." Kelly's sharp eyes turned to me. "And we still might, if we find the virus is continuing to spread among you. But we are not barbarians. We will assess the situation first and then determine the best course of action," he replied coolly. Then he turned back to my father. "Besides, strictly speaking, you requested our assistance when you contacted President Schwartz." My father sighed and looked at me apologetically before speaking. "We can argue about my mistake later. Their expertise might be useful in identifying what we're facing." Without another word, my father led them to the room where we had sealed Howlett's body with the original mummy. I suddenly realized that since the doctor's abrupt death, I hadn't gone back to check if the spores were continuing to spread. When we turned on the external lights to see the field hospital area clearly, I couldn't help but shudder. "My God," one of the soldiers whispered, as we looked through the glass at the horrific scene forming inside. In the short time we were gone, the virus had spread throughout Howlett's body. It had even created strange fleshy web-like structures, reaching out and connecting with the mummy just a few feet away. It was growing into a new organism. Just seeing that strange mass of flesh writhing and inflating as if it had its own set of lungs was enough to chill my blood. "How long since Dr. Howlett died?" the colonel asked, his eyes fixed on the grotesque mass. "1 or 2 hours, 3 at most," I replied, horrified it could spread so fast. "If it continues like this, the entire facility could be infected within the day," my father declared. "Is this room sealed?" Kelly asked, checking the vents. Before we could answer, he gave the order. "We need to destroy this thing before we are all at risk, unless any of you are already infected and acting as a host." For the first time, he said something that made sense. "I know this discovery is historic, but the risk to civilization is too great. It needs to be stopped right here." My father, contrary to my expectations, immediately objected. "We must collect samples before making such a drastic decision. We don't even know what we're dealing with." My father stepped up to Colonel Kelly, blocking his path. This is the greatest discovery in centuries. This virus originates from the fungi kingdom, something incredibly rare. DNA analysis from even a tiny fraction of this tissue could open up years of research. We might even identify the evolutionary link between viruses and fungi. I understand what you're thinking, Dad, but the situation is beyond our control. We'll find other samples in the ice. This mountain is big enough. My father pursed his lips, clearly unhappy, and looked at Kelly with anger. Fine, but at least you must allow my team to return to the excavation site. Any further samples we discover will be kept in the ice to prevent contamination. Is that a fair agreement, Colonel? The officer nodded reluctantly, then ordered his soldiers. Hansen, Albright, get the equipment. We're burning this entire area. About half an hour later, Hansen, Albright, and 2 other soldiers appeared with flamethrowers, while Colonel Kelly ordered me to unseal the room. I insisted that everyone wear the bioprotection suits Kelly had brought. A little protection is better than nothing, I said, opening the metal door. I stood on the other side of the glass, holding my breath, and asked Dominic to record the entire event. Even if this is erased from history, we need a record so the world knows we had no other choice, I said. Slowly, the soldiers approached Howlett's writhing body and aimed their nozzles, eager to end this nightmare. The fire erupted. I watched the flames sweep over the mass, beginning to melt it. What happened next was horrific, haunting me forever. The creature began to move. Suddenly, from the mass, the mummy's hand shot out and clawed directly at the lead soldier's biosuit. In shock, he fell backward, the flames shooting up to the ceiling. Immediately after, we saw the bizarre, faceless corpse moving like a puppet, fire spreading everywhere. It slammed against the glass where I was standing with the force of a freight train. The ulcerated mass stared at me, small spores pushing out from its distorted face, spraying toxic chemicals onto the glass. The reborn creature fell back, scrambling like a crab toward the other soldier who was trying to help Hansen up. The wounds on its body continuously opened and closed, spraying more spores into the air as Kelly ordered his men to retreat and destroy that monster. Dominic tried to capture everything, but it happened too fast. The creature slammed the glass again, this time cracking it. Dominic instinctively protected me. We fell back as the creature began to squeeze through the breaking glass, new wounds on its body hissing. "Back away! Move!" Dominic screamed in panic as the glass finally shattered. In that second, I was sure we would be next, but Colonel Kelly activated another flamethrower, torching the body with maximum power. We scrambled for cover as the creature let out a piercing shriek and writhed on the floor. It clawed at the ground like a mad dog as the fire quickly consumed its flesh. The creature thrashed and screamed for a few more seconds as Kelly advanced, ensuring the flames scorched every part of it. Then the room fell silent, and the immortal creature was motionless once again. Kelly wiped the sweat from his forehead and looked at me grimly. "Get your father on the radio. The deal is off. We cannot let any other samples be brought out of here," he ordered. My father refused to stop the excavation. "This is still my site. You came here to supervise, correct? Then do your job. I'll do mine," he stubbornly told the colonel. "3 of my men are dead," Kelly countered. "We're dealing with an unidentified organism. This virus is not something to play God with, Professor. And until I receive orders from the university, from your superiors, I will continue to excavate. If we only collect data and send it elsewhere, it harms no one. The world deserves to know," my father replied. Kelly scoffed and pointed at me. "Your daughter was almost killed when that corpse attacked. What if we aren't so lucky next time? How much more blood do you want on your hands?" That remark stopped my father, but before he could answer, Norman shouted from the excavation area, "Professor Gamble, we've just found a new chamber." My father immediately abandoned the argument and ran toward the site. I followed, more cautious but just as curious. The hole in the ground looked at least 200 feet deep, but there were clear signs of an ancient civilization below. Even with the limited light, I could see small structures protruding from the earth walls. When the team brought in more heavy equipment and shone stronger lights, what I saw became clear. They were combined blocks of crystal fused over centuries. But what was hidden beneath the ice confused me even more. We saw dozens, if not hundreds, of other mummified bodies. This was an entire civilization sealed away because of an epidemic. All of them had been infected, and we had just found the mass grave where they sacrificed themselves to stop the spread. As a scientist, there are moments I can look back on and feel proud, but my time in the Andes is not one of them. When I remember those dark days, all I have is a heart full of regret. Kelly insisted we contact the university for permission to destroy the entire tomb. However, their response was not what any of us expected. This site needs to be fully excavated. Its historical value is paramount. Besides, it's still frozen, isn't it? As long as there's no change in temperature, there's no risk, the president affirmed. I couldn't believe their audacity. But now that the order was given, I knew Kelly and his team would carry it out. My only choice was to cause as much trouble for them as possible. I found Norman, the team leader, who had been drinking since Manuel's death. "What you're asking, it's treason, you know that," Norman said when I presented my plan. In short, I knew the excavation team had explosives. I honestly didn't know how Norman would decide, but after a few seconds, he drained his glass and slammed it down. "Damn it, I'd rather die here than let the whole world get infected by this, whatever it is." "Gather as many of your men as you can," I said. "We'll start in the middle of the excavation site tonight." My next challenge was my father. He had been quieter since Kelly arrived, but I could see he was worried. I needed him on my side. I knocked on his door and found him looking at an old family photo, the one with my mother. "I wish your mother was still here," he said, his eyes wet. "She would be proud of the woman you've become." I smiled, but my heart twisted, realizing how much he trusted me. "Dad, this is bigger than us. I think we've gone too far," I said gently. "Perhaps," he admitted, "but it's out of our hands now." "Not yet," I shook my head. "I think we can still make a difference, but I might need your help." "Angie, I know you'll do what you think is right, but I'm tired. Wait until morning, after the next excavation, okay?" he said. I sighed, not wanting to argue. Instead, I hugged him and returned to my room, trying not to think about what would happen tomorrow. The first thing I did when I woke up was check my father for any signs of infection. "It's just old age," he said as we walked down to the excavation site. Kelly's team, along with armed soldiers, had already advanced toward the mass grave, eager to dig into this hell. Dominic stood near the edge of the ice with his camera, silently observing everything. Norman gave me a slight nod, a gentle gesture assuring me his team was still on my side. I wasn't left to wonder long. My father pulled his hand away from mine and stepped toward the colonel. My heart sank. "Dad, what are you doing?" I asked. "Sir," my father said to Kelly, "I'm not sure what my daughter is planning, but I believe she intends to sabotage this operation." He immediately ordered 2 soldiers to escort me to the side. I almost resisted, but Kelly's eyes showed he wouldn't hesitate to shoot me. "Dad, don't!" I pleaded, but his resolute eyes showed no compromise. Immediately, armed soldiers advanced on the workers, forcing them to turn on the machines. "Any wrong move will be considered a death sentence," the colonel declared. I watched the giant drills pierce the ice, as if summoning an evil force. "Haven't they learned anything from the last 48 hours?" I shouted, trying to get Norman's attention as the drill went deeper. And then I started to see sticky black liquid welling up from the cracks. It wasn't oil. It moved, just like the corpse before. "How much further to the next chamber?" Kelly shouted. But Norman didn't listen. He kept drilling, his eyes filled with determination. Then I realized his plan. He knew he wouldn't survive. I bit my tongue and held my breath as he pressed a sequence of commands on his device and then closed his eyes. I knew it was coming, but the explosion was still deafening. A few soldiers were thrown back, but those closest truly faced the nightmare. From the blast point, I saw something that looked like a grotesque mushroom rise up. It shrieked, like the cry of a vicious bird of prey as it dove down to consume. A second explosion, just large enough to drown out the creature's terrible shriek, sent the equipment falling into the pit. I saw Norman's crane tip headfirst into the abyss and cried out, but it was too late. Dominique Legra also fell into the monster's maw, and I knew it was over. The cave began to collapse. Kelly shouted for everyone to retreat. I saw masses of the fungus desperately crawling toward us, trying to infect and spread. I ran for my life, as if the devil himself was chasing me. The soldiers screamed in panic, running and avoiding the spores erupting from the exploded creature. Millions of spores filled the air like a deadly rain. We had just reached the next tunnel when the ceiling began to collapse. My body froze. This is how my mother died. Is history repeating itself? Then I felt a sharp pull. Kelly, defying all danger, had risked his life to pull me out of the collapse. When we got back to the central area, the tremors finally stopped. We checked for survivors. Besides me and Colonel Kelly, only 3 soldiers and my father remained. "Report! Anyone injured?" the colonel asked. I staggered up, grabbed my father, and pushed him hard against the wall. "Someone will be injured if you don't explain what the hell you were thinking trying to dig deeper." I loved my father, but in that moment, all I felt was blind rage. How could you be so reckless? "Angie, I just wanted your mother's legacy to be remembered. I didn't want it to turn out like this," he said softly, his eyes filled with regret and shock. I saw he was telling the truth, so I let him go. "We need to get out of here before the rest of the chamber collapses," I said to the soldiers. Kelly, despite the pain from the explosion, checked his men and nodded grimly. "This site is compromised. Any remaining components of the creature are likely too deep, and without equipment, nothing can continue. We can only leave. Let's move to the observatory. It's closest to the surface. We'll be safe there while we call for transport," Kelly suggested. The soldiers obeyed. My father reluctantly followed. Kelly announced that rescue would arrive in the morning. My mind was still reeling, but I knew there was one last obstacle. I approached where my father was and heard a strange wheezing sound, exactly like the sound I heard when the mummy revived. I rushed in to save him, knocking on the door. I saw my father coughing violently, blood staining his sleeve. The sight made me pale. I ran to his side. "You're infected, aren't you? Let me check." "Angie, I'm fine. It's just old age," he tried to reassure me, pushing me away. I shook my head and demanded he sit down, quickly grabbing the first aid kit. "You're not going anywhere until I'm sure you're healthy," I said. Reluctantly, he agreed. Using my stethoscope, I listened to his lungs, and what I heard horrified me. This was worse than I thought. I recoiled, looking at my father in shock. "You're sick, and you tried to hide it. Why? Is this the virus we found?" He shook his head, trying to deny the truth. "You don't understand, Angie. This is what your mother would have wanted. This could change the world." I stood up, furious. "You can't leave here infected. You could kill billions. Look at what's happening right now. What you're thinking of, it's genocide." "We don't have the right to decide what nature intended," he retorted. I saw the fear and frustration in his eyes. I also saw the denial. He believed what he was saying, and I knew what I had to do. I put my hands on his neck, pressed him against the wall, and squeezed. I saw him struggle, but I couldn't let another nightmare happen. I cried and sobbed as I continued to press my fingers into his trachea. Then it was over. In the last moment of his life, I saw the spores begin to emerge from his throat, and I knew I had done the right thing. Standing there, stunned, watching my father's body fall at my feet, I gathered my things and returned to my room. When the sun rose and Kelly announced that rescue had arrived, I left the Andes, alone. I don't want to know what we left behind, or if it will ever be found again, but I pray that it is all buried forever. And if you believe in any higher power protecting us, I beg you to do the same.